Did the FBI set up Michael Flynn? Well, it looks like, based on new documents that were unsealed yesterday, that looks to be the case. As the Federalist reported, explosive new Flynn documents show that the FBI goal was to get him fired. Now, this has been all over Twitter and all over social media, and indeed, yesterday evening, I did a Periscope on this subject, a live stream where I talked about how the Flynn bombshell lands. That Periscope has gotten over 71,000 views. And is generally well received and does the same format that we normally do here with split screen. So we have essentially cut that up and made it available for you here on YouTube, and I hope that's what's upcoming, and I hope you enjoy it. But before we get into that, first, do remember, if you're new here, hit subscribe on the Human Events. We're just getting started with our YouTube channel, even though we're a lot more well established on Twitter and Periscope, but we're going to try and give you more and more new content, so please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, if you are on the YouTube side or you're new to this and you want to see me when I go live on a regular basis, I highly recommend following me on Periscope and Twitter. There I am at Will Chamberlain. So thanks very much and enjoy. All right. What's good, folks? How's everybody doing? So obviously a bombshell landed this evening. As the Federalist reports, explosive new Flynn documents show that the FBI goal was to get him fired. So I want to go through the newly released documents and then talk about like what they mean, how to kind of fit them in with the puzzle of what has happened previously in this investigation, and just generally analyze like what does it mean for General Flynn, what does it potentially mean for other people who are involved in this, is there criminal liability for them, like what exactly can be done here. But you know, normally I've been trying to understate this. Like, I mean, last week, if you had seen me talking on Twitter and in Periscopes, I was reluctant to be like, well, it exonerates him. This is pretty darn close, and we'll get into why in a second. So, okay, so first, like, what happened, right? So, minute order today from the judge granting, which was actually a consent motion, which means both parties agreed to unseal this new evidence. And this is a product of, if you remember, back on April 24th, that's last Friday, Sidney Powell filed a supplement to Mr. Flynn's motion to dismiss the case that talked about how the government produced stunning Brady evidence that proves Mr. Flynn's allegations of having been deliberately set up and framed by corrupt agents at the top of the FBI, and that defeats any argument that the interview of Mr. Flynn was material to any investigation. Well, this is the Brady evidence. This Brady evidence was under seal. It's now been unsealed, and here it is. So I want to go through each of these in turn and kind of talk about what I think all these things mean. So first, we have an email entitled Potential Questions for DD's Call from Peter Strozk to James Baker. So again, Peter Strozk, the famous asshole former FBI agent, just epic, terrible person. But in case you don't know who James Baker is, James Baker was the former general counsel of the FBI, so the FBI's top in-house lawyer. And who's the DD? Well, my guess, I don't know the answer to that, but my guess is that stands for Deputy Director, who would be Andrew McCabe, right? Because if you remember, Andrew McCabe is the guy who made the call to Michael Flynn to try to convince him to let FBI agents come over and interview him. So, and as you see this email, I'm sure he thought through these, but for DD's consideration about how to answer in advance of his call with Flynn, we know that it was that McCabe called Flynn. These are questions that would be relevant to McCabe, right? And all of these questions are really interesting. Am I in trouble? Am I the subject of an investigation? Is it a criminal investigation? What Strozk is saying is that, hey, McCabe, you need to be prepared about how to answer questions that Flynn might have about why it is that FBI agents are coming over to interview him on the second day of the White House. And remember, Comey was bragging about how disorganized the White House was. Well, it's obvious that these guys were very, very attuned to the possibility that, Flynn might realize what they were up to and then decline the interview. And rather that the goal of Peter Strozk and all of these people, apparently, including McCabe, including Comey, was to sort of lull General Flynn into a situation where he had a false sense of security and then induce something to get him fired over, right? So that's something that's happening here. Then more here, we have, this is a question regarding 1001. So 1001, actually I can pull that up right now. It'll be a little loud. 101 is the false statement. Boom. Yep. Oh, sorry. 18 USC 1001. That's what it's referring to. I should remember that. So 18 is the criminal code. 18 US Code 1001, except as otherwise provided, anyone who knowingly and willfully conceals material fact to the FBI Actually, I don't know if it says the FBI here, or sorry, in any matter within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislative, or judicial branch. So false statement of the FBI counts. That's a 1001 claim. So that's what that's talking about. So here it says, here's the original question, right? This is an email from Lisa Page to Peter Strozk. I don't know that this is, I'm pretty sure there's not two emails, but it might be. There might be some other recipient here. I have a question for you. Could the admonition re 1001 be given at the beginning of the interview, or does it have to come following a statement which agents believe to be false? Does the policy speak to that? And so apparently Strozk forwarded this on to somebody else, probably some lawyer, and this person, whoever, it's not specified, sent a message to Lisa Page and Peter Strozk saying that they haven't read the policy lately, but if they recall correctly, you can say it at any time. So what this is basically saying is they knew they were going to go interview Flynn and try and get him on a false statement charge. They knew that in advance of the interview. So what are they like worried about? Well, they're worried about, like, do we have to make the disclosure? When do we have to make the disclosure that he could face criminal liability if he lied to us? And they're thinking, do we do it at the beginning? Do we do it can we do it? Do we have to let him know right after he makes a false statement, or can we just kind of do it at the beginning of the interview and then he's covered? And that's right, like, that's why Lisa Page says here, if it seems to be the former, then it would be an easy way to just casually slip that in. Of course, as you know, sir, federal law makes it a crime, right? Like, what Lisa's trying to do is they know that they're trying to get General Flynn to lie or to say something that could be false. Like, that's the entire goal. All everybody's talking about here is just how to lull General Flynn into having a false sense of security. And then the big bombshell is the set of notes, which is really hard to read. I don't want to read it here, but it's been effectively transcribed by here. This is coming. This is from Catherine Heritage's Twitter account. So she has an image of, like, what was redacted, like the transcription of these notes. Redacted. We have a case on Flynn and the Russians. Our goal is to resolve the case. Our goal is to determine if Michael Flynn is going to tell the truth at his relationship with the Russians. Our goal is to resolve the case. Really? No. The goal is, that's literally their goal is to see if he'll commit perjury. And then a whole bunch of random stuff. And the next one is, this is continuing. Interview. I agree that yesterday we shouldn't show Flynn if he didn't admit. I thought it last night. I think we should rethink this. What is our goal? Truth admission, or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired? Right? Like, is that the goal here? Then it sounds like you were all trying to entrap him and get him fired. Also indicates that, like, what's the purpose of all this? They have some antagonism towards Flynn that we'll get into later. And also it says, if we get him to admit to breaking the Logan Act, we can give facts to the FBI and have them decide. We'll get into that later, but remember, the Logan Act is something that was there's never been a federal conviction of the Logan Act, only 2 indictments. The last one was in 1852. And yet, FBI, this guy, Bill Priestap, who is no longer with the FBI, he was the former assistant director of the FBI Counterintelligence Division. He was Peter Strzok's direct supervisor. And he is here talking about how we're going to get a Logan Act prosecution, something we've never prosecuted ever before, to go after Michael Flynn. This is a serious, this is a bureaucratic conspiracy. They were conspiring against Michael Flynn. And Priestap was in on it too. How do I know it's Priestap? Well, this is where John Solomon comes in. John Solomon reported this evening, that the person who wrote those notes was indeed Bill Priestap. Says, here you go, multiple officials confirmed to Just the News that the author of the notes is William Priestap, the now retired FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. As he retired back in December 2018, it was said that his departure is unrelated to the 2016 investigations and the questions that have been raised about them. Right, yeah, it doesn't look like that anymore. More on the Logan Act, again, what does it do? It criminalizes negotiation by unauthorized American citizens with foreign governments. So this is the idea that, only the executive branch and only the White House can conduct foreign policy and not random people. It says notes here, thank you, Wikipedia, only 2 people have ever been indicted on charging of violating the act, one in 1802, the other in 1852, and neither was convicted. So the fact that there's this collective FBI effort to use the Logan Act to get General Flynn to just as a pretext for interviewing General Flynn to get him to lie so they could get him fired. There's now documentary evidence of this. If it's now not a conspiracy theory, it's literally a conspiracy demonstrated by documentary evidence at this point. So that's remarkable. So again, back here, this is exactly what Sidney Powell promised, and she has delivered. Really, the only argument I think that is where she might not be completely on solid ground, where I'm not sure, is this argument about it not being material at all to any investigation. I think she's right, but like as a lawyer, I can see the way that a motivated prosecutor could argue the other side, saying that like even if there was a kind of side goal or a secondary intent to get Flynn to perjure himself, there was still a legitimate basis to ask him all these questions because there was still a Russian investigation. And to really sort of defeat that, you would need to I think there needs to be other stuff disclosed about whether or not these FBI agents knew when they were interviewing Flynn that there was no possibility of it being relevant to the Russian investigation. So that's still, I think she probably is right, but I think it's still, I can see a way to argue it. That said, there's no question that this is Brady, right? So to discuss Brady, Brady disclosure consists of exculpatory or impeaching evidence, impeaching information and evidence that is material to the guilt or innocence or to the punishment of the defendant. Comes from the Supreme Court case Brady versus Maryland, and if the prosecutors don't disclose this to the defense, that violates due process. And in particular, I think I discussed this on yesterday's Periscope. If you haven't watched that, that was kind of talking about some of the shenanigans going on with Covington and Burling primarily and how they were dealing with Flynn. But remember, Judge Sullivan has a very, very aggressive stance on Brady. This is his standing order that he files in every case. Like, Brady should govern every criminal case, but and most judges don't feel like they need to issue Brady standing orders because Brady is a Supreme Court case and the governing law. But Judge Sullivan feels so strongly about Brady that he issues a standing order in every which is just an order that repeats itself at the beginning of every criminal case in his courtroom that basically says the government is required to turn over all the Brady evidence as soon as possible. And it's also, there's more to it. The government's is not obligation to produce it is not diminished by the fact that they have an obligation to produce it later. They have to produce all the information when it's in the government's possession. If it's favorable to the defendant and material to the defendant's guilt or punishment. And in this case, this stuff is clearly material. It is clearly material to the question of whether or not there was and in fact, like, all these documents are material to the question of whether Flynn's lies were material, right? If you wrote notes that says the point of this interview was to get Flynn to lie and not to discover information about other crimes, then those notes are material to the question of whether or not Flynn lied about a material fact. Because remember, it's like under 18 U.S.C. 1001, it's not a crime just to lie. It's a crime to lie about something material to an ongoing investigation. It's not a crime to say the sun is green. It has to be a relevant and material lie. So what this means is that the prosecutors, we're not talking about just the FBI people, but the prosecutors of Flynn, people like Brandon Van Grack and whoever else was on this case, there's no way they didn't know about these documents, right? No way. No way. There's no way this stuff wasn't available to them. These are emails between Peter Strozk, one of the primary investigators in the case, with James Baker CC about Deputy Director McCabe's call. There's no way this isn't Brady, because this is all evidence that they were motivated to get him to perjure himself, and they didn't produce it. They didn't produce it. It was exculpatory evidence they didn't produce. Brandon Grack should be disbarred. This is disbarable. This is like a massive professional ethics violation by Brandon Van Grack. He should be fired from the DOJ tomorrow morning, and potentially and immediately have essentially be brought before the DC Bar and the DC Court of Appeals for misconduct. Whether or not there's a crime here, I don't know. I'm not super familiar with that, but I do know a professional ethics violation when I see one. Failure to produce this is a massive failure, a massive Brady failure. And Sullivan might well do that. Remember, he was in charge of handling the prosecution of Ted Stevens when he discovered egregious government misconduct and ordered sua sponte, on his own accord, without anybody telling him to, a special prosecutor to investigate the Brady violations in that case. But there's more, remember. So, think about this, guys. Think about this. Remember McCabe lacking candor under oath 3 times? McCabe's the very guy who is involved in trying to lull Michael Flynn into a false sense of security. He's personally responsible for trying to set him up, part of this conspiracy, and he personally himself lacked candor under oath 3 times and wasn't prosecuted for it. Wow, right? They went after Flynn, they didn't go after McCabe. So basic unfairness there. Well, maybe that declination of prosecution should be looked into again. Perhaps it's time to reopen that indictment. Although, I mean, again, the problem there might be the fact that it's a DC jury, and so the DC juries are just like Russia gators. It's not clear that, you can get conservatives can get a jury of their peers in DC, but certainly Democratic FBI stooges can. Anyway, but let's not talk about some other people. Remember Sally Yates, heroic Sally Yates, the one who resisted the president's travel ban? Literally less than a week into the Trump administration, she was the acting attorney general, because again, Holder had left and Trump hadn't named his own, so she was running DOJ for Trump, even though she was an Obama appointee. Went to Trump, warned senators about Michael Flynn. She did that. What day did she do that? She did that on January 26th, if I remember correctly. Let's see where it says this. On January 26th, she called the White House counsel to bring Flynn to their attention. That's literally 2 days after the FBI interview. If you don't think that Yates was in on the loop, I don't know what to tell you. Clearly, Yates was in the loop on all this stuff. Yates needs to be investigated and examined to see what she knew about the effort to go after Michael Flynn. And she's not the only person, right? There's a whole bunch of other people as well. Also, remember that there's something I remember. I was looking into other old New York Times articles because some of these really age very, very poorly. This was an article by Adam Goldman, who is easily the worst New York Times reporter, the absolutely in the pocket of McCabe and Comey and all the rest of these people, and Brandon Van Grack. He's basically in the pocket of the Mueller team, and this is talking about, after Powell filed her motion to get dismissed for egregious government misconduct, and discussing why she would withdraw the plea. But I want to focus on this part right here. Prosecutors pushed back against some of her claims. Ms. Powell said that text messages between former FBI officials disparaging Mr. Trump, including one from the agents who questioned Mr. Flynn, would have helped her client's case by showing bias among investigators. But prosecutors said Mr. Flynn's previous lawyers were given the text on 2 occasions. And while Ms. Powell said a Justice Department Inspector General report documented the bias, the report explicitly said that internal investigators found no evidence of bias that infected investigative decisions. Remember that? Remember that whole IG report? And they're like, no evidence of bias. No evidence of bias. I don't mean to be harsh, but this is evidence of bias. This is evidence that they wanted to go after Flynn. This is evidence that they wanted to get him fired, right? That means they didn't produce what was necessary to the Inspector General. That the Inspector General apparently just didn't even have these emails. And if so, how they weren't produced is beyond me. There's a serious, serious, serious Brady problem here. So, to conclude, bombshell news today. I try not to be like bombshell every day, but this is legit a bombshell. This is documentary evidence of an effort to set up Flynn at the highest levels of the FBI. The FBI General Counsel was CC'd. Strozk was writing the emails. Deputy Director McCabe was in on it. Lisa Page was in on it. They were all looking at how to lull General Flynn, having a false sense of security, and then not disclose that he was going to be, potentially liable for false statement. How to avoid scrutiny from the White House counsel's office. It was a complete setup to get him in a perjury trap, and they knew that. It looks like they knew that they weren't interviewing him to get any information, that none of these lies could have possibly been material. They were just trying to see if he would lie about the content of the call with Kislyak, which they had access to and was later leaked because they got the NSA transcripts. So, all these people need to, I think the right move to start, let's get them all taking the Fifth Amendment in front of Congress. I think that would be a really good way to start. Let's have Senator Graham and the Senate Judiciary Committee call a hearing, subpoena all of these people: Strozk, Page, James Baker, Bill Priestap, Sally Yates, Andrew McCabe. Get them all under oath and testifying about what they knew, when they knew it, and what they understood about the effort to go after General Flynn, and whether or not there was any idea that there was anything material. Somebody says, why would they write this down? I bet they really wish they hadn't now. I bet Bill Priestap really wishes that he didn't take those notes, thinking that they could eventually be produced against him. And it really is remarkable that they were never produced by federal prosecutors. They are unbelievably embarrassing. This is a shame on our system. I think Evan Sullivan will see it the same way. I don't see that judge. I see the judge being extraordinarily angry at these revelations. They prove Brady violations by federal prosecutors. And, I said back 18 months ago that I thought Sullivan sniffed out that there was some Brady violations and sniffed out prosecutorial misconduct. And that's why he sort of tried to bully General Flynn into withdrawing his plea. I think Sullivan knew kind of what was going on. And Sullivan got what he wanted. Flynn has now moved to withdraw his plea, and all of a sudden this is all coming undone, right? like, it's so interesting how much, if General Flynn had just taken the plea, a lot of this would have stayed secret. But it really is the fact that he withdrew the plea and Sidney Powell did this dogged legal work. Sidney Powell and her team, Molly McCann, Jesse Binnall, all those lawyers, doggedly got this stuff released. And then also the fact that Bill Barr had another attorney review the case, and that's why all this stuff is getting produced. So, all right, hi folks, thank you for watching. If you watched the whole thing, I really do appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed that content. Hope you enjoyed what we did on Periscope. If you liked it, please remember, do subscribe to the Human Events YouTube, and follow me on Periscope at Will Chamberlain and Twitter at Will Chamberlain. That's the quickest way to get access to this content as fast as it comes out. When we're talking about fast-moving things like the breaking Michael Flynn news, I'm often going to go first on Periscope because of the speed of that. But we do things here on YouTube as well. So follow me on both channels. That would be great. I really hope that you enjoyed this analysis of these bombshell documents in the Michael Flynn case, and I will see you soon.